Hello, folks. Thank you so much for joining us today on this Thursday afternoon for this month's PAVE virtual panel. We're going to get started very shortly. Going to give folks a couple of minutes to funnel in from the waiting room. And while we do that, I'll go over a couple of housekeeping items. As a reminder, you will be able to find the full recording of this panel and all of our previous PAVE virtual panels on our YouTube channel. Just search PAVE Campaign or check our website, pavecampaign.org. So I want to welcome everybody to our 138th virtual panel today. And today we're going to be talking about a really exciting topic about AV safety and more specifically, sort of this benchmark of human drivers when it comes to AV safety. Our panelists today are Michelle Fowler of TRC, Chris Cusano of Waymo, and Michael Wagner from EdgeCase. So we're thrilled to have this all-star lineup here to talk about AV safety today. Many of you know me. I'm Caitlin Magny Miller. I'm PAVE's Communications Director, and I'll be moderating today's conversation. Before we dive in, I want to give our panelists a chance to introduce themselves. So let's start with you, Michelle, and then you can each give us sort of a brief intro on who you are and what you do.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me for this important discussion. Like Caitlin said, my name is Michelle Fowler. I am Transportation Research Center's Director of Applied Research. Transportation Research Center, better known as TRC, we are North America's most advanced independent mobility testing services provider. And my team specifically focuses on evaluating emerging mobility technology, which of course focuses on automated vehicles.
Fantastic. Chris, we'll pass it to you.
Great. Yeah, echo the thanks for organizing this panel, and I'm glad to be here today. My name's Chris Cusano. I'm a safety researcher with Waymo. I've been working here for about 5 years. I've been doing vehicle safety research for about 15 years now. I got a PhD from Virginia Tech, an injury biomechanics lab, and kind of been working around vehicle safety and transitioning to automation the last few years. I'm part of a group that, as the name suggests, is doing safety related research. So we publish data and research papers about safety, specifically about Waymo and automated vehicles. And another part of the group that I'm in also does a lot of safety assurance activities, works on Waymo's safety case. And so I'm going to speak about that topic as well a little bit today. So yeah, glad to be here.
Fantastic. All right, Mike, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the time today. My name is Mike Wagner. I'm the Chief Safety Officer of EdgeCase. We are a Pittsburgh headquartered Carnegie Mellon spin-out that does risk management and safety assessments for autonomous vehicles and complicated systems of all types. Started the company back in 2014. We work in a variety of industries. We've helped contribute to UL 4600, a bunch of other standards, and really love getting into the details here of how autonomous vehicle technology can be made to be safe. So thanks, Caitlin. Appreciate the opportunity today.
Absolutely. All right, I want to dive into the conversation today. And Chris, I'm going to come back to you. I want to start at kind of a high level here. We get a lot of questions in our conversations with the public at PAVE along the lines of how safe are AVs relative to human drivers? What does that comparison actually mean in practice? And how do you at Waymo think about defining and demonstrating safety?
Yeah, that is indeed a question we get asked a lot, and something that's really like top of mind for a lot of stakeholders. I think before answering the direct question, I think you have to step back and consider kind of two things. The first one is, how do we know that a autonomous system is safe before we put it on the road? And then the second question is, once it's on the road, how is it doing? Like, is it safer than human driving? And I think you can't have the second one without doing the first one, because it would be, kind of morally irresponsible to not try to answer that question before you put a system out on the road. And so at Waymo, the way we think about that first one, about like, how do you predict or verify that the system will be safe once you put it out there? We've developed over the decade of work that we've put into this a safety framework and a safety case approach. And so this is something that we do every time we release a new type of system. So that could be in a new location, like a new city we're going to, could be a new vehicle platform, could be an expansion of capabilities of an existing platform. We go through this kind of rigorous process where we have, 12 different areas we're assessing safety against. And some of those are benchmarks against humans, some of them are not. But we're trying to assess, is the system reasonably safe based on what we know? So then to answer the question that's like maybe a little bit more intuitive is like, well, how safe is it once it's out there? And we also do a lot of work in that area, looking at kind of what we call retrospective safety impact, which is like a very academic term for just, how many crashes do you get into and how does that compare to existing human drivers? So we have a website that we call Waymo's Safety Impact Data Hub. It's waymo.com/safety/impact, open to the public. And we regularly publish safety data. So this is crashes that we are required to report to NHTSA's standing general order, which is applicable to all AV manufacturers. And we compare Waymo's crash rates to benchmarks from humans in the same areas. And what we find there is we're getting more compelling evidence that Waymo has a much lower crash rate than average human drivers. So maybe the most impactful outcome is like a serious injury or a fatality. And we have a 93% reduction in those types of crashes compared to average humans. So I think this is kind of like validation of that safety framework and safety case. Like we sought out to design a system that was much safer than humans. And now we're seeing as the real world experience builds up that is in fact coming to reality. And that makes me very excited as a safety researcher.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, those are really compelling statistics. And I also appreciate sort of the level of transparency that you have put forth with that data as well. Kind of in a similar vein, Mike, there's a lot of discussion about this quote unquote human driver baseline. We actually got a question from a reporter about it last month, which really sparked this conversation. But I'm kind of wondering, is there such thing as sort of an average human driver for comparison, or is that concept more nuanced than it sounds? Oh, sorry.
Dude, it's definitely a lot more nuanced than that. Although, I mean, it's a reasonable starting point. So, not a criticism of thinking about that, but I think all of us in the industry are trying to get to the point where the technology is going to be safer than a human driver. So that naturally leads to discussions about, you know, how you can get there, how much safer than a human driver you really want to be. Certainly, if we have technology that's working well and that is, paying close attention to road conditions, you're going to immediately rule out, all the different kind of human failure modes that you get from people who are distracted or maybe, not paying enough attention, or maybe they're under the influence or something. So all that ends up in the statistics of how safe an average human driver is. And I think it's reasonable to say we want to hit a higher bar. And I think most of the players in the industry are thinking that way. What I'm saying is not something that like is distinctly an edge case platform. So that's one thing to think about. And then the other thing to think about, which is kind of implied in your question, is like, are there other kinds of ways of thinking about safety? And like what Kristofer was saying about having data coming from how effective your technology is out on the road, and comparing that or contrasting that to before you're getting ready to deploy, how you know you're ready to deploy. We can think about what needs to be in that deployment decision, and in that case, you're usually putting forward a new kind of technology, and so you want to make sure not just statistically that you think you're ready, although you have to pass that bar, but you want to make sure that it's like it's handling situations that humans would expect you to handle. And those things aren't necessarily statistical outcomes. Those are sort of like, yeah. We've built the system the right way. And then I guess the final two pieces that Edge Case looks at when we analyze a technology are, how well you've built it, how safe do you think the technology is going to be how mature are the processes behind it, but also like how trustworthy is the organization operating the fleet? Does it have a strong safety management system? And then also how closely is that fleet looking at all these metrics? And again, Kristofer touched on some of these ideas because they're not they're not unique to the way we think about it. But so, a lot of the discourse about how safe is safe enough and how do we compare to humans, you just want to have a very holistic way of looking at it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that kind of segued nicely into a question I have for you, Michelle. You are coming from a unique perspective in kind of the research and testing side of things. How useful would you say this human driver baseline is when you're evaluating AVs, and what are some of the challenges in making that comparison meaningful?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as Mike and Chris mentioned, that human driver baseline is a useful starting point. But when it comes to research and testing, we focus on being very clear about what we mean by human, because we don't really view it as there's no single average driver. Human performance really varies dramatically based on factors like age, driving experience, or momentary states like Mike mentioned of distraction, fatigue, impairment, and then also even the external conditions that the driver's operating in. So, like how familiar they are with the roadway, the weather, the lighting, all of those things go into driver performance and behavior in a certain scenario. And so, from a testing perspective, we focus much more on tying that driver behavior to the specific scenario that we're evaluating. And so, to be clear, TRC is a proven ground, also engineering services doing this research and this testing. And so, we're able to do closed course testing and even focus on situations where both humans and automated vehicles have potentially struggled, been met with some challenge that they're working on overcoming. So things like cut-in events, pedestrian conflicts, vulnerable road user interactions, like the other panelists mentioned, areas in which the public expects the AVs to perform. And so looking at performance really in those targeted scenarios from the research and testing perspective is really much more what we focus on rather than that broad AVs are safer than humans. But one additional challenge, and it's a little bit what Chris was talking at, is that we are comparing very different scales of data, right? So human crash data, it's based on real world driving experience over billions of vehicle miles traveled, whereas automated vehicle systems use a combination right now of simulation, closed course testing, and then a much smaller set of real world operational miles. And so even when you expand the simulation out and look at the data that are extrapolated, it's obviously not going to capture the full unpredictability of real world driving data. So exactly like the panelists are saying, it's not just about that comparison of performance, but also talking about the scale, the diversity, and the confidence in the data behind the performance. So almost a statistical analysis. And then, of course, a classic challenge is that humans and automated driving systems fail differently. Like I mentioned at the top, human drivers can be impaired, distracted, or even aggressive, whereas automated systems may struggle with different scenarios like edge cases, a plug, and then, of course, unusual roadway geometry, and then degraded markings. And so, really, the question is not so much whether the system matches or is even better than average human performance. But when we look at it, we want to say, does an automated vehicle reduce the most common and most severe human errors without introducing new failure modes?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you've all done a really good job of sort of outlining the nuance to this question. And Chris, I want to come back to you. Companies often talk, and Michelle touched on this. There's a combination of simulation, testing in a closed course, and then, of course, operating in the real world. How do those different layers of testing work together to really build confidence in the safety of an AV?
Yeah, and these different types of I'll call evidence for safety really factor into Waymo's safety framework. Um, we use all of these different modalities, real world testing and experience with prior platforms, test track, simulation. Um, in our experience, they all have their strengths and weaknesses, and so that's a lot of what safety assurance is about. Like you have multiple ways to measure things. The more data and the more things you can do, the more confidence you're going to have in your assessments. And so, yeah, we're really, you know, I think a lot of other companies, not to bring competitors in here, are very heavy on simulation, and they're trying to cut costs by doing a lot of simulation things. And I think simulation is great and the technology is improving a lot, but like there's something about the real world that is invaluable, I think. And so that's definitely a big component. Um, but yeah, I think that we definitely at Waymo use all three of these modalities, and probably could come up with another couple of sources like of data generation. But yeah, they're all have their strengths and weaknesses.
Definitely. I'm going to switch gears here just a little bit and come back to you, Mike. Traditional safety metrics are often focused on crashes or roadway fatalities, of course, but AV developers are also talking about things called leading indicators. Can you tell us a bit about what those are and why they are important in the safety conversation?
They're so important because if you look at other industries like aviation, who have used safety performance indicators for a really long time, they have been so effective at driving down actual accident rates in aviation. And I'm super excited about the focus that the current discourse has on SPIs, or safety performance indicators, for autonomous vehicle fleets. So what is an SPI? I mean, ultimately, there's a bunch of different kinds of SPIs. So you want to make sure that you're operating the vehicle according to the expectations you have. You're doing maintenance, you're doing all these kinds of things, and these come in super important. Like again in aviation, because if someone's not upkeeping the fleet appropriately, you might be at a higher level of risk. You can also look at vehicle behavior. So, and this gets into some interesting statistics too, because you can look at, I don't know, an example like hard braking or some kind of vehicle level behavior. That is a precursor, but it doesn't mean that every hard braking event is one that is a problem that the autonomous vehicle caused. It might have been avoiding an accident effectively, but clearly, if you're in a situation where you're hard braking all the time, that's probably a higher risk situation. So that kind of gives you a flavor of just a couple of the kind of examples. And fleet operators that are looking at these SPIs are finding problems so that they can be resolved before they end up with an accident. There's currently robust regulation in place to say, all right, if you have some kind of loss event that's occurred, the government's going to do an investigation. There's a bunch of rules around that, and that's important. But we want to see this very proactive safety monitoring. Kristofer was talking about safety assurance. This is basically what it's all about. Again, spanning process factors, maintenance type factors, but also like really deep and interesting technical factors about how the autonomous vehicle brain is working. Is it understanding what's happening around it? And I think over time, that's going to have the same kind of benefits to autonomous vehicles as we've seen for aviation.
Yeah, well said. And I appreciate the comparison to aviation. I think a lot of, um, you know, lay people don't consider really safety in aviation, but I think there's a lot to learn from that industry because they've done such an incredible job.
Yeah, if I may just add really quick, I mean, we have great incentives in the aviation industry. I know there's been some press over the past couple of years, but probably many of you have been on a flight where a pilot is sitting there logging on just an observation that he or she made about a flight that they had, and all that information goes into a database and really helps get ahead of all these problems. So.
I could add to that a little before you move on. Yeah, I think this concept is like super important and needs a lot of attention. And like I'm a researcher, so I'm going to pitch some research. And I think in the short term, there's certain like human characteristics like hard braking or PTC, or come up with a metric that we've studied before that could indicate a problem that could be useful. I think those are challenging because as Michelle was saying before, like AVs behave and fail in different ways than humans. And so I think an approach like in aviation where you're trying to get more at the root causes of failures, uh, I think that might be a more fruitful direction to go in, because there's going to be kind of uh, unique things that pop up that we don't really fully appreciate today, probably, and I think our metrics are going to have to change. But I think a great starting point is the ones we know really well, which is just like something interesting happened here, and we should take a look.
Definitely. Michelle, there is, as you know, growing interest in transparency about how automated driving systems are evaluated. From your perspective as sort of an independent test bed, what types of testing information or metrics do you think are most helpful for understanding safety performance?
Yes. So a critical starting point for any independent evaluation, regardless of industry, frankly, is a clear understanding of where and how the system is intended to operate, right? So other industries call that boundary conditions. We often refer to it as an operational design domain, right? And so at TRC, we then use that information in order to create representative test scenarios and intentionally even probe the boundaries of that domain, really potentially getting into degraded conditions, trying to get the whatever we're evaluating to transition to fallback or minimal risk states. Because the goal is to not just understand nominal performance, but we're also looking at how the system behaves as the conditions start to approach or exceed the intended limit. So start with nominal and then expand out. In terms of, once we've set our boundary conditions, the metrics that we look at, um, I like to think of them in a few different categories. So the first are outcome-based measures. And so these are often what people call following indicators. So things like collision rates in specific scenarios. To Chris's point with automated driving system behavior, you can look at how frequently the system falls back or leverages human driver or remote operator intervention. Next, we can look at more vehicle performance-based metrics, things that how they're behaving in real time. So think things like time to collision, minimum headway, brake timing, even lane keeping performance. Those are all things that we can look at to monitor and say whether or not it's performing kind of as intended. And then as this was both just being discussed in terms of leading indicators, that's also valuable data that we can collect. So again, those heartbreaking events, near misses, even potentially what would be considered traffic law violations, especially when we're looking at more human driver comparisons, and really any unstable behaviors. Those are the type of things that I think contribute to that root cause analysis. And as an independent test organization, help evaluate if this system is behaving as intended or could potentially degrade. And it really kind of puts together that whole picture. And then I want to mention that beyond just the individual technology assessments, as an independent organization, we also like to look at things on a more holistic level. So really getting into repeatability and reproducibility. So repeatability, that asks whether or not the same test run multiple times under the same conditions then produces the same results, right? Reproducibility really goes a step further and asks whether those similar results can be achieved across, let's say, maybe different test days or slightly tweaking the environment, maybe a different test operator, or even at different test facilities, right? And both of those layers are critical for building that confidence that the observed performance is not just a singular result of the technology you're evaluating, but a reliable representation of how the overall system is going to behave, and really emphasizing that independent organizations can play such an important role because we evaluate systems using common scenarios and objective measures when they fall within kind of the same operating design domain. And so this really allows for those more holistic and meaningful comparison across technologies and really helps ensure that performance claims are grounded in that consistent and well understood testing practices across the entire industry.
Yeah, really well said. And I kind of want to zoom out just a bit. And Chris, I'm going to come back to you. Say your data shows really strong safety performance. It sounds like in your case it does. Public trust doesn't always follow automatically. And this is a topic we talk a ton about at PAVE. How do you think about communicating safety in a way that is transparent and really understandable to the public?
Yeah, Yeah, this is definitely something we consider a whole lot. I'm like a student of history of vehicle safety, and there's like throughout the history, there's been a lot of great ideas that would be very safe and that people just don't like, and so they reject them and they don't get out into the world. And so I think, yeah, we have to do the work of convincing people and addressing people's concerns where they are. I think like I'm a an academic background, and so like our approach for safety studies, like the statistics I was citing before, is to do the best that we know, which is peer-reviewed research. So we publish research papers, we make the data available, we go through blind peer review, and we publish in leading journals. And the peer review process is not perfect, but it's like kind of the best we know for doing this type of science. And so that's very intentional on our part, that like anybody can make claims and have a million disclaimers, but like, we think publishing is really important for this sort of like groundbreaking science. Um, and then I think the other really important thing, which is outside of like the safety science stuff, is just like, meeting people where they are and doing the work to go talk to people. So like me and my team as researchers, we try to participate in as many public forum as possible. We talk to stakeholders that have concerns, that have questions about our data, just to like, put a face to a name. And I think that goes a long way to explaining things. My colleagues in public relations and our policy team also do a lot of work meeting with individual stakeholders. And so, this is we know this from psychology and science. Like people are afraid of automation, no matter what the field is. And I think it's on all of us that want to see the benefits of this technology to do the work to educate people, as PAVE is trying to do.
Yeah, definitely. I have always said at PAVE that I think education's a two-way conversation, and I appreciate all the work that you guys are doing and all of our member organizations do to get out and talk to people and similarly sort of get feedback from them and tailor, our educational outreach efforts accordingly. In a similar vein, Michelle, from the independent sort of testing side of things, how do you sort of contribute to building credibility and public confidence in AV technology?
Yes, and I'll keep this as short and sweet as I can in the interest of time. But really, independent test organizations help provide that level of objectivity that can just be simply difficult to achieve when developers are evaluating their own systems. And again, that's true across any industry, not just the automated vehicle one. Right now, organizations like Waymo, you're doing such a great job being transparent with your data and self-reporting, but adding that independent third-party testing can really help increase that confidence and trust in the results. And frankly, TRC has been serving that role for more than 50 years across all of the vehicle safety industry. That background, I think, is really important because it means that we're not approaching automated driving system evaluation as an entirely new problem. The things that we've learned from 50 years worth of crash testing, advanced driver assist evaluations in the more recent years, and all of the vehicle validation work we do, it all applies to AVs. It's about defining repeatable scenarios, measuring system behavior objectively, and understanding how performance changes under different conditions. And so ultimately, third party independent evaluation, I think, help moves the conversation from just trust us to here's how the system performed under these conditions, using these measures, and that level of transparency is essential for building long term credibility and public confidence.
Yeah, really good points. We've got 1 minute left, and I've got one more question for you, Mike. So I want to kind of wrap up with a more forward-looking question. As AV technology continues to evolve, what do you think the safety conversation is going to look like, say, 5 years from now? Do you think we will still be asking whether AVs are safer than humans, or do you think that benchmark will sort of evolve over time?
I think some of this is, a learning curve getting used to the technology in society. So five, I don't know what the timelines are like, but at some point we're going to get used to seeing self-driving cars on our roads, and I think there'll be less kind of of that learning curve conversation to have. But if you look at at a autonomous vehicle fleet as a massive set of automation, there's always going to be security questions. There's always going to be ongoing reliability questions. And if we're twice as safe as a human driver, then in a couple of years we want to be three times safer, right? I think so. So I don't see any time in my lifetime, at least, the question of safety and having an open conversation about how AI can serve the population and the whole country. I don't think that's going to ever go away. It'll just change as we get used to the way these things work and they become part of our lives, which I, for one, am very much looking forward to. I have a 16-year or 17-year-old who's getting their driver's license soon, and an 80-year-old mother who's, I think would love to get in a self-driving car. So I think it's going to evolve in some interesting ways.
Absolutely. Great way to wrap up. And I just want to say thank you so much, Michelle, Chris, and Mike, for taking the time to join us today. Like I said, we will post the full video recording on YouTube after this later today. So follow us on social media. You can find us at PAVE Campaign to see that as soon as it's released, or visit our website, pavecampaign.org. And thank you to everyone who attended. We appreciate your participation.
Thanks all. Thank you, Caitlin.